Hello, and welcome to this online event, Evolution, Not Revolution, Teaching Business Strategy in the Era of Climate Change. My name is Steve Hardman, and I'm from Gruyter Publishers, and I'm very pleased to welcome you today. This session is being recorded, and you'll find the video later on our social media channels and on Gruyter's YouTube channel. We're going to spend about 40 minutes on the panel discussion, and that will give us plenty of time for questions at the end. So if you have any questions or observations, please can you use the chat function. We are scheduled to have 4 speakers today, one of whom has not yet joined, but I'll introduce all of them to you in the hope that the 4th speaker will join us shortly. The moderator for the session today is Richard Freeman. Richard is founder and CEO of Always Possible. This is one of the UK's fastest growing strategic development companies. Richard is a specialist in organisational strategy, social innovation, workforce development and systems leadership. His work has won awards for helping growing organisations to connect better to the bigger issues around them. We also have Patricia Prado with us, and Patricia is a senior lecturer in business ethics at Newcastle Business School, Northumbria University. Patricia focuses on sustainability and innovation, with a particular interest in sustainable food systems and agri-food global value chains. She's currently playing a leading role in the responsible business area at her business school. The other speaker who is yet not with us is Gary Carr. Gary is a senior lecturer and MBA course director at Leeds Beckett University. Gary teaches strategic management across several undergraduate and postgraduate programs, and he's an internal reviewer and mentor for the UK Professional Standards Framework in teaching and learning at Leeds Beckett. Gary is also senior fellow of the Higher Education Academy. And last, and by no means least, is our final panelist, Dr. Andrew Grantham. Andrew is Principal Lecturer at the School of Business and Law, University of Brighton. Andrew has taught strategy for many years, and is also 23 years experience in business research at Centrum, which is a Centre for Change, Entrepreneurship and Innovation Management at the University of Brighton. Andrew is author of Sustainable Business Strategy, Analysis, Choice and Implementation, which was published by Gruyter in April. Before I hand over to Richard, I'd like just to say a few words about Gruyter. Gruyter is based in Berlin and is one of the oldest independent publishers in Germany, with a history dating back more than 270 years. Gruyter is a leading publisher of academic content, and we also publish books for business professionals. In total, we publish more than 1,500 new book titles each year, and we also publish journals and various digital products. Everyone attending this session will receive an email afterwards with a link to the recording of today's event, and we'll also provide a code which offers a 20% reduction of the price of Andrew's book. So that is the end of the commercial, and I'll now hand over to Richard.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you for your generous introductions and for setting the scene there. And thanks to De Gruyter for putting this event on. I'm really excited about the conversation we're going to have this afternoon. We're going to be unpicking all things around sustainability and business strategy, particularly looking through the lens of sort of higher education and business schools. But you know, this conversation could go in all sorts of interesting directions, and we've got a great panel to help us to do that. As Steve said, we're going to be chatting amongst the panel for around 40 minutes, and then there will be an opportunity to take questions at the end. But don't feel that you have to wait until we get to the end if you've got a burning question that sort of comes out of something that you hear. So do pop that in the chat box, and then I'll do my best to ask all those questions once we get to that time at the end. Great to see so many people here as well, and I can see people still arriving, so welcome if you've just joined, not missed anything yet. But I think probably best to crack on. Gary will hopefully join us shortly. So the first question I'm going to put to the panel is that the title of this event is Evolution, Not Revolution. But we know that there's a tension between kind of radical action on carbon reduction and the urgency that we see is needed, and adapting for long-term change. Andrew's book firmly makes the case that existing and well-tested tools for business strategy and teaching business strategy can actually be adapted so that sustainability is at the heart without having to completely reinvent the wheel. So Andrew, I'm going to come to you first to kick off, as it's your book. How do you see this manifesting in the way that business schools need to evolve their curriculum?
I think those of us who work in universities know how difficult it is to evolve a curriculum. We're quite bureaucratic. We have systems in place for change, but also systems in place for teaching. Progressively, I think colleagues are using more and more resources that are available from publishers, and rather than not actually having a lot of time to create new content for themselves. So there's forces at work there. But I've used, as Steve pointed out, I've taught strategy for many, many years, and I've used a number of resources, books and online resources that I increasingly got frustrated with because climate was not there. And the colleagues out there probably do review books themselves and can see where it is. So one book, for example, that I reviewed a number of years ago is just into a new edition. And I've just checked to see where sustainability actually is. We have to wait till chapter 13 before we get to sustainability. So that's kind of illustrative of the frustrations that I had, and increasingly recognizing there were two forces. One, there's a kind of personal force inside me, which is I get up in the morning to teach my students about the future and making futures for themselves. I think that's what a university education is for. I mean, particularly in business and business management. So that's really important for me. And I also work with some firms. Steve said I've got a research background as well. I work with some firms that, and this is, I think, particularly, and I think you recognize this, Richard, particularly with respect to small, medium-sized enterprises, where there's a need to embrace sustainability without actually fully understanding where or how to get that knowledge or what's actually required. And I've been to a number of meetings in the chamber in Brighton where these issues have been discussed, and it's really important to get companies and people together to discuss these issues. Now, the evolution element of it sort of taps into that, which is, many of us have a particular education and a particular view of things, and there's plenty of radical books out there. There's plenty of alternative economic models out there. But the fact is, this is where we are. And I didn't see in many texts at all ways of adapting the simple frameworks that we have, that our students are subject to from school, certainly in our first year. But I think they're ready to be playful. And I think that's an important term that I want to use, to be playful with these models and have some confidence to say, well, that's all well and good, but the reality as I see it, the world as I'm living, and I think we're going to be talking to some extent about a student view, to empower the students to say, actually, this is fine, but I want to be really critical about it. And another aspect, I think, of our view of sustainability and building sustainability for firms and in teaching is to bring our students back to a very critical view of the tools that they use. And I think in my time, I'll be interested to see what colleagues say, but in my time, I've seen actually these tools being regarded as being some kind of truth. So 5 forces, that is the structure of industries. That's the way in which we develop business strategy. It's been around for a very long time. The world is changing. It has been adapted by some of the authors, but I think we're heading to somewhat of a different kind of paradigm. We're still about markets. It's still about profit, but there's much more going on, and there's much more of a stakeholder view, I think, of the world. And I think that's the kind of incremental element of it, is where we introduce our stakeholders to much more critical and powerful actors than they currently are.
Thank you, Andrew. Really, really interesting point there. And this idea that, we can keep waiting until the conditions are perfect and all the knowledge is there and all the frameworks are recreated. But actually, that's sort of, in a way, why we're in this predicament. We've sort of been waiting for something and not necessarily getting going. Your words, playful, critical, confident, there's a bit of a gauntlet there thrown down to the way that resources are used Let's not just take things at face value. Let's have a dialogue around the sort of the resources and tools that aspiring business people and students looking at the world of business should be using. Patricia, you know, do you agree with Andrew? Do you disagree with Andrew? I mean, you're an ethics specialist. How far or how much are you seeing sustainability in the curriculum at Newcastle?
Well, thank you for inviting me for this panel. It is really a pleasure to be here. And we didn't mention in the beginning, but I met Andrew for the first time when I was visiting a student at Centrim. So it's at that time I was working around, my PhD was around innovation, and so it's quite interesting that immediately after, I think, or when I was finishing my PhD in 2013, sustainability became or started to become so urgent for me. I think the same way that now, after meeting Andrew, after all these years, we started discussing and talking about this urgency and the critical thinking that Andrew was mentioning. I think it's quite interesting. I have been discussing this with colleagues in the module I lead at Northumbria University in our business school, because I mean, I lead a big module in the first year, and we were discussing the importance of, in the review, we were discussing the importance of bringing this criticality to students and how it is important for them to understand that they can change, they can look at what is there, but they can also, they are the ones who are going to change. And in terms of the curriculum, but specifically, I'd like to at this point talk about the two issues that Andrew has touched, the playfulness and the tools that we are going to use with our students, because this is something that I try to embed in our module. I think learning is much easier if, from the student's perspective, if there is this playfulness around, if they can play with that. So in our seminars, we tend to use playful activities and business tools, and that is the connection to the other point in terms of, we don't need to reinvent the wheel. There are lots of tools that exist there that can be reapplied or readapted or used, but having sustainability at the core. So we're all busy with all the work the academia demands from us, but we don't need to really create so many new things in terms of the tools that we are going to use. And I can give practical examples of tools that I have used. So if we talk, for example, about developing scenarios, so it is there. It is wonderful to use with students in terms of talking about sustainability and the future. So what is going to happen in this future? It's not about guessing. It's about looking at the facts that exist here and what we can predict in terms of the change in the management practice that we can make. What is the likely scenario that can happen? What is the worst scenario that can happen? We also have other tools like business model canvas that it has been used for so long, and it's something that's there, and if you just adapt the sustainable business model canvas, which is basically the same, but you have the sustainable aspects apply to that. So it's an advancement. So okay, now we can change, we can reframe our business model, or we can create a new one. But for existing business, you can look at your current business model and say, no, now we want to change. We want to have sustainability at the core of our work and what we do. And if we apply these aspects there in this tool, it is there, and we can change. And we have been using this with students. So we try to show them that these are tools that are there, they're going to use in the real world when they join. If they haven't yet, they join a business, and they are going to see these tools being applied. Even the SWOT analysis, we can use the SWOT analysis. If you look into sustainability aspects, you can still even use SWOT analysis. So I do agree with you, Andrew. There's a lot that we don't need to reinvent the wheel and just apply.
I think
what
on
is
that,
there.
if you don't mind, Chair, Richard, I'll just I mean, the SWOT is a very good example whereby my students are introduced to SWOT in their first year, and they use it. In the first year, they use it lightly. We want more rigor as we go through. But in the final year, I expect them, the key threat I expect to be climate change. I mean, for most firms, that is the threat that they will be encountering. And I've just finished marking a lot of my students' work in recent weeks. A surprisingly large number of my students are still interested in the oil industry. And they will apply.
The same here.
They will, indeed. I think that they have some aspirations somewhat, but they will apply a SWOT, and climate change, bizarrely, is not in there. And for me, that says we've got to work a little bit harder, a little bit earlier with our students in order to get them, because if you put climate change as your key threat, everything else changes. And the outcome is different. And that's a very, very simple intervention to make. And we can do very similar things to that, like that, with all of the other models as well, I think. And that's what I've tried to do.
Yeah.
The other side to the SWOT is the kind of the pest, isn't it? The one that's a bit more sort of external facing, the politics, economic, social, technological influences. But you could frame that all against climate. You can go, you know, climate politics, climate economics, the social impact of climate change, the technological things that are being done, and look at all of those and how that's going to perhaps make or change some of your business decisions in the future, because it all feels very interlinked as well. So you could even narrow a little bit that other side of it.
The problem there, and this goes back into the kind of rigor and critical view, is that, and maybe Patricia and colleagues also experience the same thing, when the students apply it, it's very much siloed, right? So this is political, you know, this is economic, this is social, this is technological, this is legal. And the value in that model is bringing it all together. And that's the critical element that I think all of us who are lecturers and teachers in business strategy dream of. And we know that the students that can do that are the ones that will do well in our assessments, and that's another question we might want to come to. But that is part of the training that we need for our students earlier on in their career, so that they have the confidence and knowledge to say, I can link that with that. It doesn't have to be mutually exclusive. They can be linked together, and linked together, they have more explanatory power.
Mm-hmm. And I love how the business model canvas still stands up as, you know, such a simple tool, but it's still used. And the overlay of, you know, I've used it with social enterprises, and you have a kind of social business model canvas, as you say, Patricia, the sustainability one. And I see very, very well established businesses and highly experienced strategists still coming back to, you know, what is essentially a few boxes on a white page, but it's just incredibly efficient.
One more thing, Richard, is that unfortunately, one of the constraints I think that we have as teachers is we have to cram business strategy into a semester or into a year. And what I would like, so I'd like my students to do a PESTEL analysis or 5 forces, and I'd like them to do it again. With a different industry, or the parameters change somewhat, so that we can compare and contrast, and that I think you find, and Patricia, you'll certainly find, that it's an iterative process. We do it over and over again until we've refined the models and the content and those people who are involved in it, that it actually becomes an optimal outcome. Whereas actually, when we do it with students, we're actually cutting some corners a little bit in order to be able to get it into our program. So that's another thing that I would like to see, is that business strategy becomes 2 semesters in the final year that all students have got to take. But I would say that, wouldn't I?
But also, what a quite an exciting time for students to be, because there's new knowledge coming out all the time. There's new ideas. So actually, that kind of learning on the fly, in a sense, and sharing that and seeing what other people are doing makes that a little bit more exciting, I would say, than learning something that was sort of predetermined or tried and tested 20 years ago. My second question, so I'll kind of come to you first, Patricia, with this. The overall purpose of business education is to help equip students so that they can be more employable or entrepreneurial in their own business ideas and ventures. So how does increasing knowledge of impact of climate change and how to essentially minimize that impact in business help meet that overall objective? How does learning about all of this, if we are to embed it more in the curriculum, help a student to, you know, find that first job?
Yeah. I can talk a little bit about my experience at Sombra University, what we are trying to do now. But before I started that, I can say that this is what we have been saying. It's really surprising to see that the business schools, in a way, we still do not have sustainability as part a mainstream part of our curriculum. And as Andrew was saying, the great example of a book that starts talking about sustainability, chapter 13, it is something added at the very end, and it's something that's not really part of this curriculum, because there is not a space anymore for business as usual. You know, it is this is what the students need to understand at the very beginning. So it cannot be something at the last chapter of the book, or it cannot be at the last, you know, an optional module or a module at the end of the course. It has to be part of the business, because otherwise we are going to be teaching the same things we have been teaching so far. And it's really important for the students to understand when they start. Well, they're talking about business schools, but of course we can talk about other faculties and departments at different universities. But from the perspective of business school, it is really important for the students to understand that there is no more space for profit first or profit only, you know, because there will be no planet if we don't change. If we don't really change what we are doing, the way we are doing, there will be no planet. So it makes no sense at all. And it's not about being pessimistic in this sense. It's about bringing this awareness, because many students, and I've been seeing this, I work with students, well, I have different levels, but at the moment I've been working more with the first year students and students even in the foundation year. And many of these students, they arrive with no knowledge at all of the relationships between business, economy, and society. You know, they do not have this clear idea about these connections and how what we have done in terms of business, in terms of the industries we have developed so far, how these business and how these industries, they are responsible for the climate urgency that we are living now. And that's why I think the awareness is the first step. So the first step that we need to develop with them is this awareness, is bring to the knowledge that yes, there is this relationship, yes, there is the responsibility. We have to take this into account. We have been responsible for this climate emergency, and all the IPCC reports have been talking about it. But this last one, this one from released, I think, April this year, it was very clear. It recognized that it's unequivocal now. This is the word they have used, that it was the human influence on the warming of the climate and land and ocean. So it's like we have been responsible for this. And if we have been responsible for what happened so far, we have to understand that we cannot keep doing it the same way. And if we are preparing these students to be future business leaders, future entrepreneurs, sustainability has to be at the core of what they are doing now, because you're already late. You know, we are already late. So awareness is the first step, but we have to equip these students with knowledge, with skills about how to change their business and looking into society and the environment. They need to understand that there are massive impacts that our businesses, our industries have been causing into societies and to the environment. And it was interesting, the example that Andrew gave. It is more or less the same with my students. Many of them still talk about BP and other oil industries. And it's interesting how they try to talk about them. Look, they have sustainable practices. You know, this is the type of industry that, unfortunately, we have to be really much more critical about what to expect from them in a very quick, short future.
They've also got big PR budgets. I mean, it's interesting as you talk about this kind of army of business school graduates now, potentially, or have the capacity to go out being more informed, being more equipped, being a bit more critical. But they've also got a job to do, haven't they, to navigate some of those more traditional industries. They're going to have different and tricky conversations with potential employers. That power balance might make that quite a challenge. But
yeah, sorry, if you allow me, particularly because probably the senior leadership that you are going to find in these new companies, I mean, particularly if they are big companies. If they are smaller, maybe it is easier. But if they go into these big companies, the big corporations, of course, the senior leaderships belong to another generation with a different perspective. So it's going to be very challenging for sure.
I guess what we hope is that those senior leaders recognize what's happening eventually, and that they're not getting the best new talent, because that talent's kind of voting with its feet and going with the companies that are a bit more awake to it. Interesting though, Andrew. I mean, what's your take on this? How is a new sustainability agenda within a business school ultimately helping that primary aim of employability and pathways into work?
Okay, the first thing I'm going to say is just to add one thing into the debates about oil companies and activist shareholders. It's been a very interesting time for activist shareholders in recent times, and we shouldn't ignore the power of that. With 0.02% of shareholding, you can get 3 board members on ExxonMobil. So that's another area that's a very exciting area for students to consider. In terms of the employability, I've got two points really, and it relates back to some extent to smaller companies, the SMEs. You talked about PR budgets for large companies, Richard. Well, SMEs don't have large bundles of money, and sustainability is to some extent peripheral, but increasingly important. I think my students are eminently employable if they can go to an interview or they can talk to managers and say, I understand about the scopes. I understand scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3. I've got tools at my disposal to be able to do that, and we can do that in-house. We can get some idea of where we stand, and we need to do that because our customers are going to be asking sooner rather than later about the carbon footprint. Now, sustainability is more than carbon. That's absolutely true. And my book tries to deal with the Sustainable Development Goals more generally. But the critical one, as Patricia has said at the minute, is carbon. And so employers confronted by competent graduates who understand these frameworks, understand how they might be able to apply them and to do it in a cost-conscious way, I think is a really useful thing. The second thing, and not unrelated to that, is that the students, we spend a lot of time, certainly in the recruitment of our students, saying, actually, what we do is we make you stand out. And in my university, we make you stand out by understanding sustainability and understanding what firms will be needing to do in the future. And I think that makes them employable in a way in which is different from the past.
Thank you very much. Some really useful observations there. I'm going to move on to question 3, and it reflects on the final chapter of your book, Andrew, which I'm neither a business student nor an academic, but I found it a really, really fascinating read. So that's my objective bit of plug for the book there. It really is very valuable read. But in the last chapter, you clearly make the point that for real and lasting change to happen in business, then the fundamental core governing documents of businesses need to change, the articles of association, and we need to move at scale from businesses being pure shareholder value to being stakeholder value. We see that in movements like the B Corp accreditation and others as well. But what role can higher education and can business schools have in enabling that change to happen more widely in the business sector? Patricia, I'm going to come to you first on that one. Okay,
thank you. So Richard, well, I have also read the book, and I can speak as a lecturer and someone who is going to use the book with my students. So yeah, thank you, Andrew, for the book. It's really an urgent really message that it's there, that it is urgent, that we need to change, but we need to change strategy. And that's what I particularly like about the book. It's talking about this change in the strategy of the business schools and what we need to do. And we have this urgent and really relevant role as higher education, as academia and business schools. We have this role with society. We got to a point where we know that it's not possible to make a change on our own. We need all the stakeholders involved, and of course there is a lot that is being, government and society have been increasingly waiting for or hoping that business are going to help make this change, because most of them have the means, or they are leading and they are in different countries, so they can help with this change. But from the university, I think, perspective, I would say that the strategies in terms of changing towards sustainability, I think, at least in the UK, I'll dare to say that I think many or most of the universities, they one way or another, they have already sustainability as part of the strategy. So they have managed to somehow brought sustainability as part of what they do. And many of these universities, they are leading world-class research. They are doing, they are undertaking this research that are making change. Really, they are causing impact in the real world. So we have the research area in many of our universities who are really leading that. Some universities also, they have managed to look at themselves as organizations and started changing and changing their strategy as organizations themselves, and trying to, for example, be more sustainable as an organization, as reducing the environmental impact, reducing, being more efficient with energy, and on all these things. So there are different levels where sustainability has become part of the strategy of different universities. But I think what is really shocking is that, unfortunately, business schools seems to be really lagging behind. As I said before, sustainability is so surprisingly to see that sustainability is still not the mainstream, is not the core of all business schools and in their teaching, in what they deliver, because this is a role that I think we should take. And at one sense, I can say that I'm lucky in a way that I joined Northumbria a couple of years ago. Of course, not in a good moment, it was in the middle of the pandemic. But from this perspective, in terms of sustainability, I can say I was lucky, because when I joined, the business school had already discussed the revision of their programs, and they had designed and they were starting to implement new programs. And these new programs have been formed by different stakeholders, students, local governments, local businesses, all people that were involved. And sustainability was something that has emerged as what would make the difference in terms of the students' career and getting to the jobs. And because of that, we are implementing a new area, a responsible business area. So that's when I joined Northumbria, the business school. And what is great is that these modules, they are running across all programs. And I have just finished this term, the first one at level 4, that is the first year. And I have been teaching these students from all the programs, and a good part of what we are talking here, we have been discussing now, is part of what we are doing there. Basically, that's the message is being sent to the students. We need to change it, and there is this kind of surprise with all this critical thinking about the role of the business and the business school in changing these discussions. So I think I can say I'm lucky in that sense, because I think it's not exactly what happens in many other schools. It is even something new. I cannot even say anything about the results. We have just started, but also I'm very happy to hear some students. It's very rewarding when you can listen students and they can say, I was not expecting this. Wow, this is so important. It's important that we are discussing these issues. I was not expecting, or I had no idea. I heard students say this. I had no idea that there was these connections between business and the impacts that business cause in society. Of course, as you said before, there's still a lot to go. I mean, we still, there is this difficulty about understanding the real impacts, for example, that an oil company has caused, like many other ones. I do a lot of research with the food industry, and I give many of these examples to students, which is very surprising for them to know where their food comes from and what are the impacts of the production of that food. And we still have, I think we have a long way to go, but there are possibilities. This is one of them. We need to change. And I think in this sense, business schools need to bring sustainability to the mainstream of their schools. And of course, after that, there are many other possibilities. So, for example, we have the United Nations PRIME, the Principle for Responsible Management Educations. I think most of the schools in this country are signatories of PRIME. I don't know exactly which actions are really being taken, but there are several possibilities, I think.
Really interesting points there, and I think particularly the one about the business schools sometimes lagging behind even the rest of the institution. And I'm not this is not aimed at either of your two fine institutions, but I absolutely see some really cutting edge research happening around reducing carbon emissions in vehicles, or some stuff that's been funded by a green growth platform, some really exciting, but none of that reflected at all in the business schools narrative. So it's doing that join up locally even before business schools can seek to have influence elsewhere. Just before I come to you, Andrew, with that question, just a reminder to the audience listening in, and again, as I said, great to see so many of you. Do put questions in the chat bar. I can see one there from Hashim. That's fantastic. I'll come to you in a minute, Hashim, but please do fill up the chat box with as many questions as you can, and I'll be sort of opening those up in about 5 minutes. So Andrew, in terms of this kind of shareholder to stakeholder value transition, what role do you think business schools can have in helping spread the word?
Well, the first thing, can I endorse your idea? It's a great time to be in a business school for students, right? It's a real, it's an open door, and it's a blank canvas. Call it what you will. The students are very much about what we call co-creating with us this future. So I think that's really important. With respect to the final chapter, I'll keep this short. I was really influenced by the work of Colin Mayer from Oxford University on the future of the corporation, work that's funded by the British Academy. I'd recommend anyone here to go and have a look at the outputs from that work. And it's not just about tinkering. This is fundamental change, which is been endorsed by some of the largest corporations as well as finance houses and the like. So there's a real rich seam of material there, much of which is available through the British Academy, and also you can get it on YouTube. But it was the issue about articles of association, and that's the relationship, Richard, that you were talking about the kind of PR budgets. Go to any large corporate, the oil companies, you'll see what they say about what they're doing with regard to ESG, for example. And it's all well and good, but go and have a look at their articles of association and see how they are balanced. And for as long as the articles of association are out of balance with what they are actually saying that they're doing in public relations terms, then we've got a problem. Now, you've already mentioned B Corps, Richard, and they have to effectively change their articles of association. And indeed, law has been changed in the United States to enable firms to be able to do that and not be in and to remain compliant with business law. So, but yeah, again, my students, it's one of the exercises that I set them. Okay, pick your firm, have a look at what they're saying about sustainability, and now go and find the articles of association and see what actually is the purpose of the firm. Colin Mayer says the purpose of the firm, I think, as Patricia has already said, has got to change. And that is much more of a stakeholder view. My final point there is, in my stakeholder chapter, the question right at the end is, should we have the planet as a stakeholder? Should the planet be on the board? If it is, where does the voice come from? Who is the voice of the planet? Because we're pretty sure the planet will be screaming currently. On that basis, we need to work out how to do that, because I think that's one of the great omissions and one of the great moves forward, I think, that we might get for stakeholder and stakeholder approaches to business.
Do you see one day there being, even some kind of mandate to have a director with a responsibility for sustainability or something like that? Much like any business would be expected to have somebody with a kind of financial brain. Should there be somebody representing the planet?
Well, that's the question, is it? Who is that person and what are the qualifications for doing that? Now, the book points out we've done it before with CFCs when we had a hole in the ozone layer. The planet has had a voice before, and we need to bring that back. And there are some examples also in the book of habitats that have a voice in much more in local politics, and they could be models for the way in which it can be done.
Fantastic, thank you very much. I noticed how you didn't do a pitch for the book there. You're far too modest, Andrew. So we don't have Gary, which is a shame, because I really wanted to put this question to him. So I hope it's all right. But briefly, you know, having a look at the value or the importance of case studies. Now, you know, I'm speaking at a conference on Thursday in London, set up by the finance industry, but for charities, and it's all around ESG and sustainability in the charity sector. And my talk is going to be nothing but case studies. I'm just going to say, look at what these guys are doing, look at what these guys are doing, look at what these guys didn't do, and that will be my talk. So I really do believe in the power of case studies. But in terms of, you know, how important are they as a professional teaching tool for you, and you know, what case studies can business schools start to use to demonstrate what sort of ethical, sustainable business practice looks like, and how that can be an advantage rather than just a sort of nice to have, or as we've talked about, a PR kind of you know, beside to the PR spin. Andrew, I'll come to you first on that.
Okay, I'll try and keep it short. Yes, we teach through case studies. The danger with case studies, I think everyone knows, is that they can just present some kind of ideal future, ideal firm. What I've written about is that there are case studies that don't appear to be about climate and sustainability, but it's something that we can design into our teaching, whereby we say, okay, here's a case study of a firm with a strategy or strategic objectives. Where is the climate in there? How would you incorporate the climate into that case study? Here are some examples. Here are some B Corps, for example. So here are some examples for you. How might you incorporate that thinking into this if you were advising this company about their sustainability policy making? So again, it's that critical element that we need students to have the confidence to be able to apply what they see somewhere into something that's not quite so good, and have an optimal outcome.
Thank you, Patricia. If you got a
I'll try to speak very quickly so that we have time for the questions. So as Andrew said, yes, we do case studies. They are really important. I think mainly to learn lessons. You know, what we can learn from this successful, but also sometimes mainly from the unsuccessful cases. So as I said, at the moment I'm working more of introductory level. So the case studies that we have been using with them is bringing case studies from the news. So every week before starting, when introducing the topics, I bring a piece of news, something that's going on, from, we say, bad examples and good examples of responsible business, and look, this is what has happened. What can we learn from this? So this is one of the types of case studies. Of course, there are the other ones that are more in detail, and we have to adapt, because of course we know that it's not one case suits all, but the idea that bringing to them different perspectives from what is going on, hopefully we expect that they are going to have these lessons. We all are going to learn these lessons about ethics, about responsibility, about sustainability.
Thank you. We've got some great questions, which makes me very happy. So we'll now bring in the some of these terrific points here. So Hashim says, how can we discuss the role of policymakers in shaping business strategies and ensuring that they are more sustainability oriented? Hashim says that we need sustainability enforcement, not just research recommendations. So I guess there's a kind of implicit question in there, you know, how can business schools, research institutions have more teeth, be more confident to push policymakers to actually do what they say they're going to do? Andrew, I'll come to you on that one.
Well, the policymakers are very much part of my stakeholder view, and we've got some frameworks for how we can deal with policymakers. It depends what their power is, what their relative power is in a particular industry. Now, as we've increasingly deregulated, policymakers, I presume we're talking about policymakers in government, policymakers have less power, but that has been the objective, is to deregulate and allow managers, which we understand, to actually make the decisions. But sustainability, I like the idea of sustainability enforcement. I think we probably need to rework the word enforcement there. I mean, it could be compliance, or it could be, we can turn it into something positive, that actually sustainability is not a bad thing. Sustainability is your business, your value proposition. That is ultimately it. Without that, there is no value proposition, I think is the point that I keep trying to make. So the other aspect of that is to bring in the community and enable the community to have its voice, to say, actually, this contravenes what is good for us as a community and a society more generally. Unfortunately, we see less and less of that being possible in policy forums currently. It's certainly in the UK, I think elsewhere as well. We have to reverse that, and community and people have got to get their voice. And I think we can see this in the younger generation. They're not taking the rules as they currently written for them. They're saying, no, we're there. I'm in Munich at the minute. We've got the G7, and we've got lots of Fridays for Future young people who are there saying, listen to us.
Tricia, quick point on policy?
Yes, I think this is quite an interesting question, and of course we could have a long debate around that. As I said in the beginning, in my introduction, I have been working with the food industry, and in this area particularly, we have lately we have a lot of the sustainability standards being privatized, and the role of the regulating the food system has been really given to the private groups, and this is quite a challenge, because as Andrew was saying, there is this trend into the regulation. On the other hand, we know that, and probably that was why Hashan has suggested that the enforcement, because we know, for example, that there are many, in the case of innovations, for example, there are many of the case of that innovation is just it just happened, or sustainable oriented innovations, they happen mainly or mostly because you have these regulations in the market. So you have this it's finding this balance. It is quite hard. We need to bring all these people to work together and try to find where the power should be, how to bring the sustainability standards or whatever put in place. And there are cases where I'm undertaking some research on that now, that we call this participatory governance, which is quite interesting, cases where you can see the state or other stakeholders, not only the private corporations, they all working together to try to improve these standards in relation to sustainability, and particularly in the food production. So it is possible to have this balance, but it's quite a challenge.
Well, food is very interesting, isn't it? With the new post-Brexit kind of linking farm subsidies to environmental land management. I guess that's an example perhaps of where policy regulation is doing, but we've yet to see whether that's going to be in any way effective over the next few years. Question from Anthony, really fascinating one. To what extent do you both consider neuroscience when looking at sort of business behavior and how people function as they do within organizations and developing sustainable organizations? I know it's a big growing area in kind of business research. Andrew?
The extent is not very high, and that I'm not going to go into territory that I have no competence in particularly, but do you know what, that's why we've got this webinar to get just questions like that, where we can think, okay, I need to incorporate that, I need to have an answer for that, which I don't, and yes, that's absolutely correct. I can see some other questions that are very similar in terms of scope. I'm humbled to the extent that I'm going to say I'm not. I've written a book to have a conversation, and this is the conversation which I'm delighted to see.
I think some of the clinical studies of the kind of 4-day week and the effect on on well-being and productivity, and and with a sustainability angle as well, will be really interesting to see when those results are published.
4-day week is being trialed currently in the UK. There's lots of evidence that that's a good thing. It's very much part of the stakeholder agenda. But yes, it's not embedded. It's still very much trial. Universal basic income, all of these things are factors in the new world of business.
But also how how it affects people's sort of brain and cognition is fascinating. Trisha, any thoughts on neuroscience?
Well, like Andrew, is not really my area of expertise. So, but I think this is quite interesting also to bring these other perspectives, as Andrew was saying. It's a conversation that we have, and we need to bring all these perspectives to have a more holistic view of what is going on. And sometimes when we talk about sustainability, we tend maybe not to think so much about these type of topics, considering we as humans as part of the process. So we tend to look more into the planet, because of course that's the part that is more urgent at the moment, with things to be more neglected, but we need to incorporate our perspective to as part of this planet.
Thank you very much. Question from Jonathan Sapsed here, who I remember from when he was based in Brighton and did the Fuse report. That was one of my favorite bits of research. Nice to see your name, Jonathan. So a bit of a challenge here, I guess, as there's a published book, which I have a physical copy just on my desk downstairs, has been the impetus for this conversation. But he's saying, what about the impact of all that printing? What about the impact of the digital cloud storage when we are sharing lots of digital files? Is the book publishing industry, I mean, Steve, you may have a view on this as well, in terms of the academic book publishing sector, is there a conversation about sustainability there, and are there better ways of disseminating, sharing information and research? I don't know who wants to take that first.
Richard, shall I take that one?
Yeah.
And I think it's a very good question. And the short answer is I'm not aware of any sort of study at the moment comparing relative effects of print versus digital. But I think there is an assumption that digital is better. But with print, obviously, there's the question of paper production. Also, I believe a lot of water is used in paper production. There's warehousing, energy costs come in there, and there's also distribution. Most books, paperbacks, weigh about 0.2, 0.3, 0.4 kilos. We published recently a handbook which weighs 3.5 kilos. It's a big beast of a book. And we had an order from India for 25 copies of this book, which we supplied. But the total weight of this was like 95 kilos, which I think is probably something like a fridge freezer. Yeah, there are a lot of costs and implications in terms of energy there. But I think the short answer is no, there aren't any sort of studies at the moment, but I think it's a very good question.
Thank you. We're fast running out of time, as these things always tend to do, and they're so interesting. But there's 2 more questions on the board, so I will try and get to those and encourage pithy answers from Andrew and Patricia. Thank you for that, Steve. That was really helpful. So Katharina says, strategy tools might be easily adaptable to adequately integrate sustainability as the core, but the key challenges are: 1, enforcing strategy deployment and execution. You need brave, purpose-driven leadership and business model, portfolio, supply chain decisions, etc. And 2, linking sustainable strategy and sustainability financial accounting reporting. So your quick views, Andrew, on that, and any initiatives in business and management education.
I can't tell you how much I thought about accountability and reporting and accountancy. I think the accountants have got to stand up and sort this one out and make sure that the reporting is honest, open, and is purposeful. And I don't think we see enough of that. So I think it's a really important issue there. In terms of enforcement, we've got that word again. There's a section in my book about management and leadership, and I think that's what it comes down to ultimately. And I'm a great advocate, is easily challengeable, but I'm a great advocate of the thing called authentic leadership, and how we where that is the most appropriate way to move forward and to take people with us. And I think we've seen examples of authentic leadership in industrial relations in this country in recent days, and I think that's something we need to think a little bit more about with our students.
Patricia?
Yeah, I do agree. I think that's a key word, authentic leadership, and also, as I said before, I also advocated the participatory, governance. So I think we need to have stakeholders brought together to discuss, and also connecting to one answer before, we need to listen to the communities, and particularly the communities that are going to be involved. We tend to forget that local communities are different and they have their own needs, and we should involve more, I think, these groups into these discussions, not only the private companies. So yeah.
I think the final question, and it's ironically probably one of the biggest, but maybe a few thoughts or a signpost to maybe a bigger conversation. But from Immunity, apologies for that pronunciation, how can sustainability be advanced in the business community of developing nations? And I guess what roles can business schools in the West have in that?
Shall I start?
Yeah.
Okay. Again, I recognize myself as a late middle-aged white man, and that's how I've tried really, really hard. I've taken guidance from colleagues. My book is unique to the extent that one chapter starts with the history of the East India Company, so that we can start talking about colonization and some of the political issues that are hangovers, that they continue to affect economies which are not centered upon Europe and the United States. And my quick answer to the question is, we have a responsibility in the rich West to share the carbon budget and to share it fairly, because we've created the most of it in our history. And it's time for us to recognize, and for that to be reflected in business in developing countries, to recognize that it's time that the balance changed, and we use the technology that we have in this part of the world to bring about rapid change and allow something that's a little bit more incremental in the developing world, sharing the technology. If we don't do that, as Patricia has said a few times, there is no planet, there is no future.
Patricia?
So if you're going to allow me now, on the other side, as a Latin American woman, so what I can bring to this type of debate is that, yes, I do agree with you, Andrew. The rich economies, they have an obligation to help this with development, but again, you have to give voice. You have not exactly even to give voice. What the countries that you call the less developed countries, they need to have active roles. They need to have active voices. They need to be heard and they need to act. And because I'm sorry to say that, but probably have heard before, there is this European perspective of helping, the developing countries and aiding and giving, offering your knowledge to change, to make these other countries help their development. But each country knows their culture better, they know what they need, and many of them have amazing solutions. And we talk about innovation, and many of these countries are developing amazing innovations there for looking at the sustainability and what is the sustainability solutions that they need according to what they need. So these, for me, are the stakeholders that have to be brought into discussion. When we talked before about sustainable development agenda, these are voices that have not been heard as much as they should. They haven't actively participated in the decisions more than being heard. being part of decision making. Developing countries and all this, they have to come together.
Thank you so much. An important, a really important point to make and to close on. We're out of time. Demi, great question. We just don't have time for it, I'm afraid now, but do, I'm sure, if you want to connect with our panelists and continue the conversation outside of this, I'm sure that would be very welcome. Thank you so much to Dr. Patricia Prado and to Dr. Andrew Grantham, and for all of your brilliant questions. Well done, that was fantastic. And for bringing your energy and taking part in this afternoon. Steve, shall I pass back to you just to close?
Yeah, thank you, Richard. Yes, thank you very much. I'd also like to offer an apology for putting the wrong URL for the online resources initially in the chat box, but that's been corrected, and we'll send it out in the message afterwards, so sorry about that. But thank you very much for a great discussion, a really important topic. Richard, thank you very much for leading the discussion, and Patricia and Andrew for your comments and observations, really interesting. And I think, as Andrew, as you said, it's a conversation which needs to continue. So thank you very much. And I'd like to thank everybody else for joining, and also all the questions, some great questions. So thank you very much for your interest and participation. Thank you.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.